My name is Krista Bernasconi, and I serve as the mayor of the city of Roseville. And I believe we have our vice
Yeah,
mayor here too.
yeah. Hopefully, I'm not on mute. This is Bruce Hadelschelt. I'm the vice mayor for the city of Roseville. And first of all, we'd both like to thank you for joining us today. As many of you know or have experienced, if you've been on Highway 65 or 80, traffic is rapidly returning to the area, and we need to act fast before it gets worse. We know that having the right transportation infrastructure will protect our quality of life in Placer County and keep Placer moving and flourishing. And both Chris and I are excited to have this discussion about what those priorities are in your mind and how we can make them happen. Krista?
Yes, thanks, Bruce. And some of the more visible projects that many of you on the call have probably seen or are familiar with are the I-80 Highway 65 interchange, the 65 widening, the beautiful downtown bridges and trail project, the Capitol Corridor, and there's many others. And part of the process for this evening is that we get the community's thoughts on these transportation priorities and work together to find ways that we can get these projects implemented. And that's our purpose tonight. Bruce and I are here to listen in and hear what the community has to say. We know by listening in and contributing to the conversation that we hope that we can develop a plan that is responsive to what our community is asking for. So thank you all for being here, and I'll turn it back over to, I think, Gladys.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so this evening we have a pretty full agenda. We'd like to share with you kind of what traffic conditions are looking like. I'm sure all of you are experiencing that, but we want to give you some technical data around that. We also want to talk about the traffic modeling and the impact fee program that Aaron Hoyt is undertaking, and talk a little bit about the role of builders in transportation, and in particular in transportation funding. Then we're going to do a highlight of the regional projects, and then we will have a Q&A session where we'd like to hear what kind of questions you have and just have an interactive dialogue. Please stay for the end because we are going to have a raffle and you have an opportunity to win a secret prize. So with that, I'd like to introduce the team. You've already met the elected officials, but we also have Mike Lucan, who is the Executive Director for Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Aaron Hoyt, who is the Senior Planner with Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Jason Schakowsky, who is the Director of Public Works for the City of Roseville, and then Danielle Wood, whom you've probably been getting a few email reminders from, and she's with AIM Consulting as Senior Project Coordinator with AIM Consulting. So that's your team tonight.
Sure. Thank you, Gladys. Again, Mike Lucan, Executive Director of Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. And just real quick, who we are, a lot of people think, well, who is this PCTPA? Are they another, strange agency coming in here and telling us what to do? Well, not really, but we are you. So we are what's called a special district, and we were created about 30 years ago by the cities and by the county of Placer. And essentially our job is to oversee transportation, regional transportation in Placer County, plan for those projects, and then find a way to fund and build those projects. We help the cities and the county in order to do that. And we have a 9-member board of directors, which is made up of a representative from each of the city councils and town councils, and a couple members of the board of supervisors, and then 1 member at large. And they meet the 4th Wednesday of every month. And our job is, again, really to go out and find the money to try to fund these transportation resources and work with the cities and their growth needs and their traffic congestion, and try to find a solution to that. If we could go to the next slide. A lot of folks think that we only look at Placer County in terms of our boundaries, and we don't. We actually have to plan on a much larger area because a lot of our residents commute, as was stated in the polling question. 67% of our 60 to 67% of our residents commute outside the region, and a lot of times even farther, all the way to the Bay Area. And so we have to kind of work not only in Placer County, where most of our focus is, but really plan at a larger scale. And what we tend to use is what's called the Northern California mega region, which is an economic region, which includes the Bay Area and the 6 counties or the 6 counties within the Sacramento metropolitan area. And that's what we use. And then we produce a regional transportation plan for Placer County, and then that's part of a metropolitan transportation plan, which is for the entire Sacramento region. And we plan about 40 years in advance, trying to look at what are the resources that are needed, what are the where do the roads go, where do the trains go, where do the buses go, and then how do we fund this thing. So next slide. So tonight we're going to start by talking to you a little bit about traffic congestion, and that's a large part of what we do deals with roads. And so Aaron is going to give us a snapshot of where we are at with traffic congestion, both during and now coming out of the COVID pandemic. So Aaron, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Mike. Yeah, as we've all endured over the last year, there's been a number of changes, a number of disruptions in our life that COVID's had. But we're slowly seeing our economy return. We have indoor dining again. Some of our kids are returning to school full time. We even have high school football on Friday nights. So there's a lot of things that are changing, coming back to normal. Maybe you even want to consider it the new normal. But one of the things that's changing the fastest is traffic. Our traffic is really coming back to where it was before. And as employees in the region starting to go back to their jobs and their offices, we're going to see more traffic. And so I just want to elaborate on what has happened with traffic trends over the course of the last year. So from a high level perspective, I'll start here. Within Placer County, all of our residents, when we add up all the miles that they've driven, starting back in March 2020, it was about 18 miles per day on average. And this information comes from the data and analytics firm named Replica. And you can see when March 2020, as the first stay-at-home order hit, we had a dramatic drop in traffic. That kind of ebbed and flowed over the next year as seasonalities occurred. As we got into the second stay-at-home order that started in late November, we saw a dramatic drop off there, a slight increase in December with travel, and then it dropped off again. When we go back to the second stay-at-home order in the December timeframe, we were down nearly 50% of those average miles traveled on a per person basis across Placer County. But that's quickly returned now that that stay-at order has been lifted. As shots and the vaccines have become more prevalent, more people are starting to drive more and more. So let's take a quick look at State Route 65. This is really the backbone of South Placer County with our job sectors, with our retail, and provides a lot of accesses to our residential areas. Overall, traffic volumes on Highway 65 are about 6.5% lower than they were a year ago. And in the northbound direction, they're about 10.2% lower than a year ago. So we're getting close back to that fully 100% of normal. Where we see a noticeable difference in the traffic is when you look at the time of day distributions. And these two graphs on your screen, Highway 65 on the southbound on your left side, Highway 65 on the northbound on the right side of the screen, show some real differences that have happened in traffic when you look back at 2019, 2020, and 2021. You can see that we no longer have our AM and our PM commute periods. That blue line has shifted from 6 a.m. At its peak really out to close to 8 o'clock. Signifying that people just aren't driving the way they used to because they're all working from home. But where we also see another difference is during the early afternoon and evening hours, where maybe individuals' jobs are much more flexible than they used to be. And there's a lot more midday trips than there ever have been. So if you've been on 65 in the afternoon, traffic's back, it's congested, it's backed up towards Blue Oaks and maybe even further at certain parts of the day. Traffic speeds. Traffic speeds are higher on State Route 65 than they have been in the prior 2 years. And this is predominantly because of our traffic and our congestion levels. While there's congestion there, there's just not as much as there was. So it allows individuals during the day to travel at higher speeds. But you do notice during the morning and the late evening speeds are down by the dips in the bar charts there. They're still higher than they were previously. And these speeds will go back down as more traffic returns. On Interstate 80, we're seeing something very similar. We're seeing that our traffic on a daily basis is right within 10% of where it used to be. The westbound direction of I-80 is 9.8% lower than 1 year ago, and I-80 eastbound is about 10.2% lower. We see similar trends during the hourly distribution of traffic, except for I-80 is not as hasn't seen the return to traffic to the same extent as 65 has. There's much more options to Interstate 80 here, and we see that the 2021 volumes are a little bit lower than they were from 2020 and 2019. What we do see in the I-80 eastbound direction is that there's a lot of travel in the early morning hours leading up to about 6 a.m. that are still the same as they were previously. So we're seeing that overnight traffic, that goods movement traffic is still about the same, but it changes as we get into the commute hours. And again, we still see during those mid-afternoon and early evenings, those traffic levels are getting near where they used to be in 2019 to 2020. Same thing with the speeds. The speeds are still higher than they were because we're not seeing as much congestion. There's not as much backup on I-80 as there used to be. But again, as people start to return to their offices, we anticipate that this will change. So,
Travel demand model and the impact fees.
I will. Transportation funding is very complex. We regularly have 3 to 4 funding sources on a single project in order to get it fully funded and to construction. And one of the ways we pay for our regional transportation improvements is through a regional impact fee program. This is something that our agency, PCTPA, is currently updating, and I'll discuss about the project itself and what is included in this fee in the next several slides. But much like a lot of the cities in the county, in Placer County, as well as the state, we have various impact fees for fire, for parks, for roads, and other public infrastructure. Back in 2000, all the cities in the county were looking at how are we going to fund future needs. So back 20 years ago, electeds and staff were thinking about, we have future needs, how are we going to fund those? What is the right mechanism and way to do that? So the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority was conceptualized, and in 2002, a joint powers authority was set up by the cities of Lincoln, Roseville, Rockland, and Placer County. And the purpose of the authority is to collect fees on new development to pay for their fair share the most significant bottlenecks at the county that were anticipated nearly 20 years ago. The impact fee, as I mentioned, is a regional fee. It's levied on all new developments, regardless of whether it's a home, office space, commercial space, or retail. And the amount of the fee is based on the amount of traffic each of those uses are anticipated to generate. The fees can be considered the cost of new gross impact on the existing infrastructure. For example, builders can be charged their fair share if they break a facility, if they exceed the capacity of that facility. However, they cannot be charged to remedy existing traffic problems. There's federal and state legislation that applies on how these impact fees are assessed. So you may ask, well, what do these regional impact fees go towards? So on the screen, we're showing that the current South Placer Regional Transportation Authority's regional impact fee program pays for the previously constructed Lincoln Bypass, widening of Highway 65, widening of Sierra College Boulevard, the future Placer Parkway, and a series of interchanges along Interstate 80. As I mentioned, there's both federal and state laws that have a number of legal requirements on how we implement impact fee programs. I'm not going to go through each of these items here, but the short version is that we need to be able to identify existing transportation deficiencies, what currently is already at or over capacity. We need to identify what those new future deficiencies will occur as the county continues to grow. We need to use that information to determine the fair share of those new developments' impact on our existing system. And we use a traffic demand model to try to give us information and produce estimates of those deficiencies. A travel demand model is nothing more than a model, a computer tool that helps us estimate future traffic levels, but it can be broken down from those complex calculations and algorithms to three very distinct components. One is the transportation options, how people get around. Are they driving? Are they using buses, passenger rail, or are they biking to and from work? We also consider the location and the types of land uses. So is it office space? Is it retail, restaurants, industrial, or other types of uses that all have different patterns in the way they attract traffic and how much traffic they attract? And finally, the assumptions on travel patterns. We know that the Galleria Mall will attract individuals from a much larger distances than maybe just our regular retail center. We also know that the destinations that people are going to and from and the mode of travel, there are assumptions there that are all built into this travel model to help us out. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. Within a traffic model, we take into account all of our land uses. That can be our commercial uses, our retail, our parks, our warehousing, our schools also. We take that information, we overlay it with where our roads are, how those roads are connecting different land uses together. We also take into account where our bike facilities are. There's a number of people who actually do commute to and from work, or maybe also for leisure. And the last component we take is where our transit routes. Prior to COVID, our biggest commuter facility, our biggest transit facilities was on commuter buses, but we do have individuals who are commuting to and from jobs within the cities. We take all this information and use the tool, as I mentioned, to try to calculate how traffic is working and where it's going to and from. In this model, we can see that, or in this slide, we can see how the traffic model takes all these land uses and information and then portrays it in where traffic's going to and from. So in this example, you're seeing on the right part of your screen is the roadway network. And in this example, we've inserted a new roadway facility here within the blue area. And that blue shows where all the new trips are going to be attracted because there was an extra link of a roadway that was built. It also shows us that traffic's going to divert from facilities that are shown in green. So we're having traffic reduced on that because there's a new link and it's changing the travel patterns. So this model is helpful for us to try to understand what occurs with our land uses and what happens when we change our roadway network and transportation system. And finally, we can use this model also not only to determine where traffic is going to and from and how much traffic is generated, but we can use it to determine the fair share for our regional impact fee program. In this example I'm showing on the screen for this roadway, which actually is Highway 65, we can see that the roadway is already over capacity and that conceptually, if we add a new development, a new land use to the model, that model is going to generate additional traffic. That additional traffic is shown in the orange. And according to the Mitigation Fee Act, we cannot charge those new builders for the existing traffic problems. That's in the gray area. We can only charge them for their percentage or their fair share of the overall impact. So that is how we get to the regional impact fee program, where we have those defined projects listed in the left column of this table. And by using the model, we estimate how much traffic's being generated, where that traffic's going, and what those new developments fair share or percentage of the overall traffic impact is occurring. So we can see that why we need multiple funding sources. One, because we can't fund a single project with just one source. You can see on multiple of these projects, there's anywhere from 10%, even up to 100% of funding on certain roadways. But that just goes back to the fact that we have to look at our transportation system holistically and really try to figure out our future traffic needs.
Yes, Mike, do you want to talk about filling the gap?
Yeah, no worries. So to take this a bit globally in terms of our need, as the trivia question asked, our need is $3 billion over the next 30 to 40 years for Placer County for our transportation needs. Most of those occur in the south part of the county where most of our population and growth are. And as we kind of reflect back on some of Aaron's discussion, and the polling questions as well, is roughly $2 billion. If you take that 67%, when you add up all the traffic impact fees, the ones that Aaron mentioned with Sparta and the city's traffic impact fees, roughly $2 billion of that $3 billion is paid for by the building community. So they pay for almost 2/3 of the cost of that, and they do that by law. We charge builders almost the highest we can in the region, and they pay for their fair share. But our job is to come up with this remaining $1 billion, and how do we do that? And so if we can go to the next slide. And why this is significant is because up until Sparta was formed about 20 years ago, and up until about 10 years ago, we as local government had to come up with 10% or 20% of the cost of a project, and then the state or federal government, especially with regional facilities like I-80 or Highway 65, because they own those, the understanding was that they would then come in and pay for 90% of the cost of those facilities. And technically that is still the law that we have to come up with that much. But the problem is competition. As the state grows to, close to 40 million people in the state of California, and the nation is growing very quickly as well. And Sacramento is one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the entire country. In order to be competitive now, you actually have to come up with roughly half. So for every dollar that we put in, the state or federal government will fund $1. And if we don't, then we are not competitive, and we lose out on that funding. And so basically we're not competitive anymore in order to attract that state or federal funding, which leaves our roadways without the needed expansion and some of the repairs. Next slide. So everybody will probably very quickly say, well, wait a minute, we just passed this thing called SB1, or the gas tax, or the fancy name, the Road Repair and Accountability Act, a few years ago. I thought that was going to help pay for everything. Well, the answer is it pays for half. And it pays for the half that a lot of people in the transportation planning industry use a term called fix it first. And it basically fixes our roadways. It fills in those potholes. It repairs those roads that have become in a state of disrepair. It replaces our public transit buses and light rail vehicles in the case of Sacramento. It helps us with pedestrian safety and some of our bike trails and that type of things. But really it is to fix what we have. A very small amount of it does go for local congestion, but it only goes to the extreme worst parts of the state, and those are typically around our seaports in Oakland and LA and Long Beach. Most of that we do not receive to help us with our local congestion, and so we are stuck with our major projects, the 8065 interchange, the widening of Highway 65, and some of our key interchanges like Horseshoe Bar or Nelson Lane or Rockland Road. We're stuck without a source of funding for those expansion, and so that's the dilemma that we face now is we have to be competitive and come up with half the money for these projects. And I'm going to talk about some of these projects coming up. Next slide. But what happens if we do have the money? And I'm going to give you some recent examples before we kind of start going through the projects of successes where if we do have the money, how do we fix these? And if we go to the next slide, up in Auburn, we were able to garner one of the largest bike ped projects in the entire Sacramento region, where we came in and are filling the gaps of sidewalks along an old state highway in order to get people to and from school, to and from retail businesses, to and from their homes. And in that case, we had the money to match the state funding to get this project. Next slide. And then an even bigger one is last year we were lucky enough to receive about $67 million to fix a lot of mostly non-expansion projects, but things like the Dry Creek Greenway, the next phase of that, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or things like some auxiliary lanes along Interstate 80, some light rail vehicles in Sacramento, and some other improvements like a new transit line that's going to go from Lincoln to the hospital complexes and then to the light rail station in a very quick and frequent manner. But how did we do this? We actually rode on the coattails of Sacramento County. Sacramento County has a local transportation funding measure called Measure A, which essentially funds local transportation projects. And because they were able to overmatch their project, we kind of were able to get our projects funded because we combined forces with them. But that's kind of a one-time thing that we were able to do and probably won't be able to do again. But it shows you if you have the match, you can compete on a statewide basis. And then the next slide goes over I mentioned 2 expansion projects that we did squeeze in there, and that's the auxiliary lane projects, which would create a 5th lane, if you will, in the eastbound direction from the SR 65 interchange to Rockland Road, a segment that clogs up quite frequently prior to the pandemic when Sierra College was in session. And then on the westbound side, a very congested area between Douglas Boulevard and Riverside Boulevard to add a lane there, connecting those 2 on-ramps and providing a relief to that bottleneck that's there regularly on a daily basis. Next slide. So what I'm going to do is go through some of our major priorities and what we've been working on. And then at the end or during this discussion, we would like to hear from you if these priorities are appropriate, or if we should look at something else, or if we should augment these or look at them a little bit differently. So I'm going to go over these, but we really want to get your input. So really the major projects that you probably hear the most about are we call it our big 5 or 6 projects, and those are the interchange, the expanding the 8065 interchange that was built in the 80s, that needs a vast amount of expansion to accommodate the growing South Placer County, widening Highway 65, which is also important, widening that all the way to Lincoln. Baseline Road, a major alternative route to Interstate 80 that goes from Foothills Boulevard out to Highway 99 in Sutter County. We did get one of these projects funded. I just mentioned it, the 80 Auxiliary Lanes project, and that is a key part of our system. And we were able to get that funded. Next slide. So the interchange, this is probably one you all know, feel, see, and we're very happy that at least the first part of it got done. And so we cobbled together $50 million through saving money on some other projects. PCTPA has a very good track record along with our jurisdictions of having our projects be delivered on time and under or at budget. And this project came in under budget, and we got it done 4 months ahead of time. And it opened in November of 2019. It expanded the northbound direction, which at the time was the worst problem on 65. And it expanded that lane across the viaduct, created an additional lane on the bridge. And then also, if we go to the next slide, it actually improved the Galleria Stanford Ranch Road interchange. We in previous years had fixed the other side of the interchange to get to the Galleria. But this is, if you remember, is the if you're coming in the going in the northbound direction from Highway 80 and getting off of Stanford Ranch Road, if you wanted to go to Costco, you kind of had to take your life in your own hands to get across 4 lanes of traffic to get to Costco and the other retail developments. And now that interchange has been improved, so it's very safe, and it allows free-flowing traffic in and out of Rockland and Roseville. Next slide. So we have actually 3 phases to go, I'm sorry, of the interchange. To complete it, it's actually a $500 million project in general. We've spent $50 million, so we have $450 left. And so the first part of this will be to essentially widen the connector ramps to and from the interchange, and then widen the viaduct itself in the southbound direction. Go to the next slide, which overlays that, the connectors. And then the next slide. And then one of the things we try to do is, is improve projects where in the previous years when things were constructed, they weren't constructed as well as they should have been, or they had to be because of funding constraints. And one of the problems with the interchange is that it creates as you know, a large weaving situation, especially for people that haven't traveled through there before. And that weaving actually has resulted in about 13 fatalities, mostly rear end accidents, over the last 10 to 12 years. And it's a relatively dangerous interchange. And so we want to fix that. And one of the ways to fix that is to not have as many on-ramps and off-ramps as we have in had in years past. And so we're actually going to eliminate the Taylor Road off ramp. We're not going to eliminate access to Taylor Road. We're actually going to create an access point off of Eureka to get onto Taylor. So we're going to eliminate an off ramp, but we're going to give you a way to get onto Taylor Road to get into Rockland, and very important for access, but it will help with that weave. We've also done some other things like you've seen the freeway painting on the asphalt in that area to help people guide people to where they're going. And then if we go to the last slide, we'll also be widening underneath the interchange and also creating some HOV lanes. That's the last part of the project, to connect the HOV lanes on 80 to HOV lanes on Highway 65. Next slide. And this is an artist rendition of what it'll look like. Essentially, we're going to replace that clover leaf that was constructed again in the 80s and replace it with a flyover connection and bridge connection to add a lot of capacity into that interchange. And our hope is maybe by 2028, if things go right, we may be able to get that into some of that in place. Next slide. Equally as important is the widening of Highway 65. And our plans are to widen Highway 65 all the way from Interstate 80 to Blue Oaks Boulevard to 8 lanes eventually, and then to 6 lanes all the way to Lincoln. And the first phase of this project will actually address the current worst traffic problem in South Placer County, and that is to widen the southbound direction from Blue Oaks to Galleria. And here's an artist rendition of what that looks like. And we have this project actually in its final design stage. And so upon finding a solution to our funding, we are ready to go, and this project is ready to be constructed. Next slide. I mentioned Baseline Road. Baseline Road, or Riego, when it turns into Sutter County, is a very, very important commuter route to people. It gives you an alternative to Interstate 80 when things get backed up, and to get into West Roseville. And it has always been planned to eventually go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes, and then eventually to 6 lanes. And we are working with Roseville, Placer County, and Sutter County to make that happen, hopefully a little bit quicker, to get 4 lanes initially out to Highway 99, and then someday it will go to 6 lanes. But the most immediate need is to go to 4 lanes, and you probably see some development out there creating some of those expansions, but our desire is to create a uniformed expansion all the way to Highway 99 and have it be a very viable commute route. As you know now, if anything happens on that route, especially in the 2-lane sections, it shuts down that roadway if there's an accident or something like that, or a great amount of congestion when 80 is really backed up and it fails. And so we want to fix that. And then the next slide shows you an artist rendition of what that looks like. And we're going to look at 2 configurations. One is just a roadway configuration of 4 lanes. But then also we have a lot of bike ped facilities out there, some of which I'll explain in a minute, but creating a continuous multi-use path along Baseline Riego Road is a desire, and it actually improves the fundability of the project as well. Next slide. One roadway you may not have heard about is, and I don't know if I mentioned this when we were going over our big 5, but it's called Placer Parkway. And so, 20 or 30 years ago, when our predecessors planned the transportation system, which we're now implementing in Placer County, if you added 65 and 80 and Baseline Road and some other regional roadways together and expanded them, we still needed additional capacity in order to relieve congestion and accommodate growth in Placer County. And so we added this new roadway. It's a limited access expressway that goes from the Whitney Ranch interchange just north of Sunset interchange in Rockland. It would go from there all the way over to Highway 99 at roughly about Sankey Road. And it would be a 6 to 8 lane configuration expressway, much like a freeway, but owned entirely by the jurisdictions in Placer and Sutter County. And the next slide will show you that we're actually hoping to build the first phase of that $595 million roadway, which would start at that interchange, finish that interchange, build it out, and then extend it all the way over to Foothills Boulevard, which would then connect to Foothills Boulevard in Roseville. And then as development happened, it would be then built in phases all the way out to Highway 99. Next slide. Equally important, though, we talk a lot about our local roadway projects. So we work hand in hand with our cities. We don't really plan for growth in our cities. Our cities and our county plans for growth, and then we try to figure out ways to accommodate the transportation systems and fund those and help them with that. And so these are some of the very important projects that to get to those regional roadways, things like the Blue Oaks widening, the Rockland Road interchange, Horseshoe Bar interchange, and some other very, very key projects here in Placer County. Next slide. And what I'm going to do right now is in order to focus in on Roseville, and especially the area of which this meeting is covering tonight, Jason Tchaikovsky with the City of Roseville, our Public Works Director from Roseville, is going to describe some of those key projects in this area of our meeting tonight and what the city is doing with some of those plans. So Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. So in addition to working with PCTPA and the regional partners in southern Placer County on all these larger projects that Mike had mentioned, we have some important local projects within the city of Roseville that your public works staff is working on. This first one I want to talk about is the Washington-Andorra widening project. Now, this is the last section of Washington Boulevard that needs to be widened to 4 lanes. The rest of Washington Boulevard is 4 lanes wide already. And so we started looking at doing a project there, but due to the high cost of replacing the railroad underpass, the Andorra undercrossing, we broke the project into 2 phases. The first phase will widen Washington on either side of the underpass, which will provide some traffic benefit now and reduce the amount of work and disruption during phase 2. This phase also creates an active transportation link under the tracks from Pleasant Grove to All America's City Boulevard, connecting the 2 schools and the neighborhoods on either side of the tracks and providing an alternative to driving to events at the grounds. Some of the unique features of this project include green bike and pedestrian crossings with specialized signal timing, green bike striping and bicycle vehicle interaction points, and a new traffic signal at Caseburg Drive to allow bicycles and pedestrians easy access to the multi-use trail tunnel under the railroad tracks. The estimated cost of this project, $6.2 million for phase 1. Funding is through a mix of federal grants, traffic mitigation fees paid by the developers, and Transportation Development Act funding. This project was recently bid, and the project cost is coming in actually about $1 million under what the engineer's estimate was. So we're pretty pleased with that. Construction is expected to start this spring. Next slide. So the next project I want to mention is the All America City Roundabout project. So this is a new traffic control intersection being built at All America City and Washington Boulevard at the southeast corner of the fairgrounds. And this project is going to meet multiple needs in that area. First of all, it provides a controlled intersection to help the expected increase in traffic from the grounds safely exit All America City Boulevard. It provides for the safe crossing of pedestrians between the east and west sides of Washington Boulevard. It provides a connection for the Woodbridge Elementary School and the surrounding neighborhoods to the new multi-use trail being constructed by the Andorra Phase 1 project. And it provides for the traffic calming of vehicles, slowing them down as they enter the Old Town area from the higher speed Washington Boulevard arterial to the north of the project. As the entrance to the Old Town area of Roseville, the project will include some landscaping and a roundabout design feature paying homage to Roseville's tie to the railroad. The estimated cost is $4.5 million, and funding is primarily coming from federal grants with some local Transportation Development Act money being used as matching funds and for the design. And we plan to bid this project next month in May. Next project, thank you. Starting construction in late fall of this year is the Roseville Parkway Extension Project, which will provide for a 6th connection of East and West Roseville over the railroad tracks that bisect our city. Having another crossing of the tracks will measurably reduce traffic volumes on Pleasant Grove and Blue Oaks, and will likely have a positive impact on the other 3 crossings as well. This project is not only designed to provide an aesthetically pleasing vehicle overcrossing of the railroad tracks, it'll provide the first family-friendly multi-use trail crossing of the railroad in Roseville. We have another project, similar project planned along Foothills Boulevard over the tracks with the future Dry Creek Greenway West project, which will be a bike trail running from Riverside Avenue out to Cook Riola Road. The estimated cost of this bridge is $21 million, and it's being paid for by developer traffic mitigation fees. Next project. So your public works staff are always looking for more efficient ways to operate the city's 200 traffic signals in a way that will minimize traveler delay. Several years ago, we installed our first flashing yellow arrow on Industrial at Freedom Way. Since then, we have installed 4 more on Foothills Boulevard, with a 6th flashing yellow arrow recently activated on Westbrook out in Sierra Vista. And 4 more existing signals on Junction Boulevard are scheduled to be converted to flashing yellow arrows later this summer. Next slide. There are 2 more important projects planned to be under construction this year that I want to mention. First is the state gas tax funded $4.5 million phase 1 of the Sun City Road rehabilitation project shown on the map above. Road work will begin this summer, with the other 2 phases rehabilitating the rest of Sun City's pavement over the next 3 years. Currently, the contractor is finishing up the pedestrian ramp upgrades in phase 1 so that they will meet current ADA standards. This is a federal requirement that must be completed before we can begin the rehabilitation work later this summer. The other project is a $6.5 million arterial resurfacing project, which will resurface 19 miles of our major roadways throughout the city, and that's funded with federal gas tax. Next slide. Staff is also preparing several key projects for construction in the near future. The Roseville Parkway widening project will relieve daily congestion by widening Roseville Parkway in the vicinity of Creekside Center, the Fountains, and the Galleria Mall by converting the 3 lanes in each direction roadway into 4 lanes in each direction between Creekside Ridge and Gibson Drive. The project will also construct a 3rd westbound left turn lane on Pleasant Grove for vehicles traveling from Highway 65, turning left towards the regional shopping destinations. The estimated cost of this project is $8 million and is primarily funded with North Central Community Facilities District funding, along with a small amount of traffic mitigation fees. The project is currently reviewing, the project team is currently reviewing consultant design proposals, and construction could start as early as 2023. Next slide. Requests for proposals should be released this summer for the design of the Pleasant Grove widening project. This project will widen Pleasant Grove from 2 lanes in each direction to 3 lanes in each direction from east of Foothills Boulevard to just west of Wood Creek Oaks Boulevard. The majority of the widening will be in the median of the roadway. The estimated cost is $7 million and will be funded by developer paid traffic mitigation fees. And construction could begin as early as 2023. Next slide. So staff is planning to release the request for proposals this summer to design a new fire station number 8, located on the southeast corner of Wood Creek Oaks and Painted Desert. Construction could begin as early as 2023. Next slide. So while I've shared many critical projects that your public works team is pursuing, there's still more underfunded urgent work that needs to be accomplished. Locally, we have the Blue Oaks Bridge widening project, which would widen the existing 4-lane bridge over the railroad tracks to 8 lanes, 4 lanes eastbound and 4 lanes westbound, relieving the congestion that has developed along that section of the corridor. The current estimated cost of the improvement is about $23 million. The project will one day be fully funded with developer paid traffic mitigation fees. Unfortunately, even if the economy keeps going the way it is now, which is actually pretty strong, we're looking at 2028 before we would have enough money to start construction. And I previously mentioned the Andorra phase 1 and phase 2 projects. We have the funding and are beginning the phase 1 project, as I mentioned, this summer. However, the phase 2 project is estimated at $30 million. Similar to Blue Oaks, it'll eventually be funded 100% by developer paid traffic mitigation fees at some point in the future. My best guess, looking at how the fees are coming in right now and the other expenditures we have, will be sometime between 2035 and 2040 before we have enough local money to build that project. And finally, road maintenance is another critical area that we're short on sufficient resources. When done correctly, using the most cost-effective methods at the correct time, nobody thinks about road maintenance. However, when things start to fall apart, people take notice, but unfortunately at that point, it's already too late to use the less expensive preventative measures. Maintenance costs go up because the methods remaining to repair a deteriorated road are much more expensive than preventative treatments. Currently, our optimum road maintenance program, the one that's most efficient and effective, is about 2/3 funded. We're coming in about 3 million to 4 million per year short of what we need for the optimum road maintenance schedule. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike Lucan.
Thank you, Jason, for that description of all those projects within the city of Roseville. And we did get a couple questions here in the chat that maybe we can answer while we're going along here. And one is, what is the schedule for the baseline widening? So as you can probably notice out there, parts of Baseline Road are being widened by development. And so up to about Watt Avenue, that will be widened with the development projects that are occurring in that area within the next couple years. But to have a viable roadway all the way to Sutter County is going to take some time. So probably our best guess, if funding were to become available, it would probably be in the 6 or 7 years time range to get funding to build that to 4 lanes all the way out to Highway 99. That's in the most optimistic time frame. And then question back to you, Jason, is can you talk about the ped bike crossing at Highway 65 and I-80, which the council recently approved planning for at our March council meeting?
Yeah, so the freeways create a barrier for bikes and pedestrians. We have the Miners Ravine crossing under Interstate 80, but we really need some more crossings to really connect the city multimodally. So right now we received some grant money from the state to start doing some preliminary studies on where we could put some additional freeway crossings for multi-use trails. And right now we're looking at 2 crossings on Highway 65. The exact location will be determined by the study, but one will be up farther up Highway 65 towards Blue Oaks, and the other will probably be farther down 65 towards the Galleria Mall. And that'll cross Highway 65 between basically Fairway and the Pleasant, the Roseville Parkway area. We're also looking at doing studying an overcrossing of Highway 80 towards the southern end of the city, down somewhere below Kirby Way. We have the one for Miners Ravine, like I said, the undercrossing, which is a little bit farther towards the north of the city at I-80. So this would provide some connectivity at the southern end.
Thank you, Jason. And as we move, perfect segue to our next set of projects, and those deal with non-vehicular projects. So again, we spend a lot of our time on roads in Placer County because of the development style of South Placer and the rest of the county. But we do spend a considerable amount of time on our bike ped and other alternative transportation means. And what's shown on the slide here is actually the local bicycle network for the city of Roseville. This comes directly out of the city's bicycle pedestrian master plan, and it shows both the existing and planned bicycle network and pedestrian network within the city. And we work with Roseville to try to help them get grant funding for some of their priorities that are not built by development. And those fall into kind of 3 categories: a class 1 trail, which is a wholly separate trail. I live in West Roseville along Wood Creek Oaks Boulevard. And our family greatly enjoys the trail that goes from Wood Creek near Marblethorpe all the way over to Veterans Park, and it's a great trail, and we enjoy that a lot. And those are the types of trails that we are working with the city to get constructed, to get people out of their cars and to enjoy the community. With the pandemic, it's become a very large priority, and our trails have never been used the way they have been while we've stayed at home due to COVID-19. And then as we move to the next slide, we then look at connecting into regional trail systems. And everybody knows about the American River Bike Trail that connects Folsom Lake all the way down to downtown Sacramento. But a lot of people don't know that we are actually trying to build an equivalent trail system on the northern part of the valley, in Sacramento and Placer counties, which in Placer County it's called the Dry Creek Greenway, and it goes all the way from Granite Bay through the city of Roseville and then out into Placer County, and then eventually connects into other trail systems such as the Ueda Trail system in Rio Linda, that eventually then connect down into Discovery Park in Sacramento. So we're working very hard to create our version of the American River Bike Trail for people in our part of the woods to enjoy and to provide this linked network regionally. Next slide. And here's, as was mentioned by the mayor and vice mayor, the first part of that trail system, which is the Downtown Rivers project. Great project that was funded through an ATP grant and some other programs to build a beautiful start of that in Royer Park. And our hope is to expand that in both directions, both east and west, again, to make this connected system in our county. Next slide. We also connect, we would also desire to connect our other cities in Placer County to the city of Roseville and to its great trail systems, to connect Lincoln and Auburn and Rockland and Sierra College to a regional bicycle network here in Placer County. We're working very hard to do that. Next slide. And then we have gaps. It's everybody thinks that bicycle trails and pedestrian trails are very easy to construct, or easier than roadways. I shouldn't say very easy, but they're really, and sometimes even harder, because you're dealing with a lot of environmental issues, because a lot of these trails, especially the Class 1 trails, go by our creeks and waterways, and that presents a very complicated arrangement of getting the permits to do that, as well as filling in gaps in our roadway system. And so we work very hard to fill in these gaps to connect our trail systems within our cities. Next slide. The next form of non-vehicular transportation, well, it is vehicular, but non-single occupancy vehicular transportation, is our transit systems. We go to the next slide, you can see that we have 3 transit operators in the county. We have Placer County Transit, which connects our cities. And then we have Auburn Transit, which focuses on the city of Auburn. And then we have Roseville Transit, which you all know connects our city here in Roseville together. Both Roseville Transit and Placer County Transit also provide services to downtown Sacramento. Next slide. So, and these commuter buses. These are, prior to the pandemic, very, very popular. In order to get to the largest employer in the region, mainly the state of California and downtown Sacramento, we had roughly 14 trips in each direction to take our people to those places of employment in downtown Sacramento. Very popular. Before the pandemic, we actually had standing room only on most of these buses, and we are as people are going back to work and we restore confidence in the service, it'll be very, very much needed to get people to and from our downtown, the center of our region. Next slide. We also provide what are called door-to-door services, very important for our senior community and for those that don't have the means to ride our regular services, whether they're disabled or have other issues, not able to ride our regular transit service. Roseville and Placer provide a dial-a-ride service. Auburn has what's called a deviated route service, which means their regular fixed routes actually will deviate a little bit to go to people's houses or other businesses that they need to go. So a little bit different arrangement. And then we have a thing called My Rides, which is it's a non-emergency medical transit system that provides seniors and those with disabilities to medical appointments within our cities. So I say from Rockland to Lincoln, or from Roseville to Auburn, and even down to some of the medical complexes in Sacramento And we're working at very hard on some changes to that system to make it very efficient here in the near future. And then we're taking a look at a new service here called microtransit, which is a fancy name for what used to be called a jitney bus back in the 20s and 30s, which would actually pick up people from their homes or businesses and take them directly to where they want to go, as opposed to going in a circuitous route within our communities, which has been a problem with attracting ridership. Next slide. And mentioning ridership, we were in a situation, again, our commuter buses, very popular, but our local service, not only here in Placer County, but really nationwide, has seen a rapid decline over the last 10 years due to many factors, one of which is it's very easy to own a vehicle. Really, in some cases with no money down, you can have a very economical vehicle to get you where you will need to go. But really the thing that has pushed this ridership down is really transit is not designed very well to go where people want to go. It is in our most congested areas in San Francisco, densely populated areas in the nation, in downtown San Francisco and Chicago and in New York, but in our suburban areas and less dense areas, we don't do a good job in getting people exactly to where they want to go, and it's too hard, and they choose not to use the local service buses, and we have to do something about that. So in response to that, we are looking at, if we go to the next slide, we are looking at this new service called microtransit. Again, I mentioned this a couple slides ago. Instead of the big buses that meander through the community that take an hour or so to go along that route or longer, and then if you miss that bus, then you have to wait another hour, and then you go in the opposite direction, you might have to wait an hour or two, and it'll take you all day to get to where you want to go, and people just decide not to take transit. And so again, we're looking at this smaller vehicle, in this case either what are called a cutaway or even down to a van size, and essentially just like Uber or Lyft, but cheaper. You would call for your bus, and you could use a phone as well, and it would pick you up from either at your home or near your home and take you to either directly to where you're going to go or close to where you're going to go, and really get you there along with a couple other riders that are going in the same area, and get you there a lot quicker than it would in a regular transit bus that goes in these meandering routes. So we're looking at this very closely in some of our communities like Lincoln and Rockland and Roseville to see if it's a viable alternative to get people on those buses, and not so you don't see the empty buses driving around our communities. Next slide. Last couple of things I'll mention is our capital corridor, the Amtrak trains that you see that go from San Jose to Auburn. This is one of the most popular intercity rail systems in the entire United States, and was actually the most popular up into the pandemic in some months. And we have a lot of folks here in Placer County that use it for tourism purposes, or actually they use it to commute, sometimes every day, but sometimes a few days a week down to the Silicon Valley or the Bay Area. And we have one train in each direction that goes all the way to Placer County, and then you can use the connecting buses to get to Sacramento. But we really want to expand that, so we have train service all the way to Roseville. And if we go to the next slide, we're working on a plan to essentially initially have 3 daily trips in each direction, so 3 trains to the Roseville station, and then eventually 10 trips in each direction to the Roseville station, and make it a real commute alternative, not only to the Bay Area, but even to downtown Sacramento. So you could take the Capital Corridor, park, or be dropped off at the Roseville station and get to downtown Sacramento very quickly, very easily, and a very nice ride with Wi-Fi and everything else to and from your workplace if you work in downtown Sacramento or beyond in the Bay Area. The people that are on the team here tonight that spoke to you, Aaron and Jason and myself, we're not a bunch of unapproachable people in ivory towers either. You can call us any day, and we can have a discussion about transportation as well, or you can email us. And here's Aaron and I's contact information. And so if something later on tonight comes to mind, please give us a call, and we'd love to talk to you about these things. And as Gladys said, if you are so interested, you can attend future meetings. You don't have to live in the area of the meeting. We tried to design these for your neighborhoods in Roseville and the other cities, but you certainly are welcome at any of these meetings, and we will make a recording of this available in the near future, so you can share with your friends and associates on what is discussed tonight. But just really thank you for the opportunity to present this to you tonight, and start the thought process of how we might go about filling the gap to fund transportation and to create a well-connected system here in Placer County.